When the cameras lit up and Jimmy Fallon walked out with his usual burst of energy, no one in the audience expected that night's interview would become the subject of heated debate across social media. The Tonight Show had always been known for light-hearted games, goofy sketches, and celebrity charm. Channing Tatum, the Hollywood star admired for his roles in action films and comedies alike, was invited to talk about his latest project. Fallon, smiling as always, teased him about his dance background, sparking laughter in the crowd. At first, it seemed like another ordinary interview, the kind that would generate a few viral clips the next morning. But beneath the surface, there was tension brewing, and the audience would soon witness an interaction that nobody had predicted. What started as playful banter quickly escalated, leaving fans stunned, producers scrambling, and both men caught in a moment that blurred the line between entertainment and conflict. Channing entered the stage with his signature swagger, receiving cheers from fans who remembered his iconic dance moves from Step Up and his comedic turns in 21 Jump Street. He waved, hugged Fallon, and sat comfortably, ready to promote his upcoming film. Fallon, ever the showman, began with his usual quick-fire questions, joking about Channing's physical fitness routines. At first, the conversation was easygoing, but Jimmy soon pressed a little harder, asking about rumors surrounding Channing's personal life. The actor's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to steer the conversation back toward his movie. Fallon, sensing the tension but perhaps miscalculating the mood, pushed further with a comment that many interpreted as crossing a line. The studio audience chuckled awkwardly, not sure whether to keep laughing or to hold back. Tatum leaned forward, his voice dropping a note lower, and that was the first sign that this was not going to be a routine late-night chat. As the questions grew more pointed, Channing's demeanor shifted. Gone was the relaxed movie star who could laugh off anything, replaced by a man clearly protective of his boundaries. Fallon, accustomed to teasing celebrities and often poking fun at sensitive topics in a playful way, might not have realized how personal his remarks had become. When he mentioned a tabloid story involving Channing's family, the actor visibly bristled. His jaw tightened, his laughter stopped, and his body language grew defensive. The audience sensed the change in atmosphere, with whispers and nervous chuckles rippling across the studio. Fallon tried to lighten the mood with one of his famous goofy impressions, but Channing didn't play along. Instead, he raised his voice slightly, reminding Jimmy that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, even for a laugh. The audience gasped at the sudden seriousness. It was a pivotal moment, one where entertainment met raw emotion, and nobody knew what would happen next. Fallon, still smiling but clearly caught off guard, tried to pivot the conversation back to safer ground. He brought up the film's release date, hoping to redirect Channing's focus. But by then, the damage was done. Tatum interrupted, leaning closer to Fallon, his tone sharper. He called out the repeated probing about his personal life and emphasized that he was there to discuss his work, not tabloid rumors. The audience applauded his firmness, some even cheering, while Fallon's grin faltered for a brief second before returning. It was clear that the easy chemistry between host and guest had fractured, and the air in the studio felt heavy. Producers behind the cameras gestured anxiously, signaling Fallon to keep things under control. Yet, as much as he tried, Fallon couldn't completely mask the discomfort now hanging between them. What had started as a fun promotional appearance was quickly unraveling into something raw, unscripted, and painfully real for everyone watching. The clash grew sharper when Fallon attempted to laugh it off, suggesting Channing was overreacting. That single word sparked a stronger reaction than anyone anticipated. Tatum's voice rose as he reminded Jimmy that dismissing someone's feelings is not conjecture, it's disrespect. His words carried weight, and the audience, initially unsure of how to respond, eventually broke into applause in support of the actor. Fallon looked momentarily stunned, his usually easygoing nature unable to smooth over the crack in the interaction. The tension was now undeniable, and cameras captured every second of it. Viewers at home would later debate whether Fallon had indeed gone too far, or whether Tatum had simply lost his cool on live television. But in that moment, all anyone could feel was the intensity radiating from the stage. The energy in the room had shifted completely from light-hearted entertainment to an unexpected confrontation. Fallon tried once more to regain control, but the spark had already ignited into a fire. The live audience was torn between excitement and discomfort, some clapping nervously while others leaned forward in their seats to catch every word. Channing's tone had grown more controlled but also more forceful, as if he was determined to use the moment to set boundaries not only for himself but for all celebrities who had been put in similar positions. Fallon, trying to maintain the comedic tone of the show, cracked a small joke about someone needing to lighten up, but it fell flat. The room stayed silent for a moment, and Channing seized the opportunity to make his point louder and clearer. He said that entertainers may be in the spotlight, but they're still human. with private lives that deserve respect. The statement resonated with many in the crowd, who began cheering loudly, giving him the support he needed. Fallon, visibly rattled, shifted uncomfortably in his chair as he realized the audience wasn't entirely on his side anymore. Fallon finally tried to apologize in his usual light-hearted way, assuring Channing that it was all in good fun. But Channing's expression didn't soften. He responded with a sharp remark, saying that fun should never come at the expense of someone's dignity. The actor's words hung heavy in the air, and the audience reacted with a mix of applause and hushed murmurs. Some viewers later described the moment as a turning point, when Fallon's usual brand of comedy collided with the raw honesty of a guest unwilling to play along. The tension on set was thick enough to cut, and Fallon's usually quick wit seemed to falter. Channing wasn't angry for the sake of spectacle. His tone carried genuine frustration, as if years of enduring invasive questions had finally reached a boiling point. And though Fallon smiled through it, his eyes revealed that he knew the show had taken an unexpected turn that was no longer in his control. The moment spiraled further when Fallon attempted to pivot by suggesting they play one of the show's silly games. Normally, celebrities eagerly agree, laughing along with the audience as they join Fallon in playful antics. But this time, Channing shook his head, refusing to participate. His refusal shocked the room. Rarely did anyone ever reject a Tonight Show game, since it was practically a staple of the program. Channing instead said he'd rather talk seriously about the pressures of Hollywood, especially how media and late-night hosts sometimes exploit vulnerable moments for laughs. The studio grew quiet, every ear tuned to him. Fallon, caught between respecting his guest's wish and the show's comedic format, looked visibly conflicted. He forced a laugh, tried to spin the moment into something positive, but his nervous gestures betrayed him. For once, Jimmy Fallon, the master of crowd control, seemed at a loss, and Channing, firm in his stance, wasn't backing down. Audiences at home would later debate whether this was a heroic stand or an unnecessary outburst, but in the studio, it felt like history was being made. Channing leaned forward, gesturing with his hands as he passionately explained how interviews often reduce actors to gossip fodder rather than focusing on their work and achievements. He reminded Fallon that as entertainers, they both shared a responsibility to uplift rather than tear down. The crowd responded with a standing ovation from some sections, while others sat stunned, unsure of how to react. Fallon gave a tight smile, acknowledging Channing's points but trying desperately to pull the show back into safer territory. The clock was ticking. Producers in the background signaled to wrap up the segment, but Fallon couldn't quite figure out how to gracefully move past the confrontation. The energy was no longer playful, it was raw, authentic, and teetering between inspirational and uncomfortable for late-night television. Fallon attempted to smooth things over by telling a personal anecdote about a time when he himself had been misrepresented in the press. It was his way of showing empathy, of finding common ground with his guest. Channing listened, nodding politely, but his body language made it clear he wasn't entirely convinced. He pointed out that the difference between gossip about a talk show host and gossip about actors is that actors are often stripped of their humanity and turned into headlines, leaving lasting impacts on their families and mental health. The audience clapped again, this time louder, resonating with the sincerity in his words. Fallon, realizing he was being outshined on his own show, gave a hesitant nod and finally admitted that perhaps he had gone too far with the questions earlier. For a brief moment, the tension softened, but the damage had already been done, and this episode of The Tonight Show would forever be remembered as the night Channing Tatum erupted. The exchange had already gone far beyond what anyone expected from a late-night talk show, but Channing wasn't finished making his point. He leaned back slightly, collected his thoughts, and explained how exhausting it is for actors to constantly walk into interviews expecting to dodge jokes about rumors, scandals, or family matters. He said it becomes hard to share authentic moments when every conversation feels like a setup for a laugh at your expense. The studio audience, used to quick humor and upbeat chatter, fell unusually silent, taking in his honesty. Fallon, his usual arsenal of jokes suddenly ineffective, nodded slowly, trying to show that he understood. The cameras captured the close-up of Channing's face, serious, intense, and unflinching. This wasn't a movie role, this was a man speaking directly from his lived experience. And for once, The Tonight Show was less about comedy and more about truth, something the internet would soon be buzzing about relentlessly. Behind the scenes, producers were panicking. Talk shows thrive on predictable beats, an introduction, light banter, a fun story, maybe a game, and then applause leading into the next segment. But now the carefully crafted rhythm was shattered. Hand signals flew from the control booth, trying to tell Fallon to wrap it up or redirect, but Fallon seemed trapped between professionalism and the weight of the confrontation. Channing, meanwhile, wasn't letting the tension shake him. He adjusted his seat, squared his shoulders, and delivered another sharp remark about how the entertainment industry often prioritizes laughs and ratings over respect for the human beings involved. The audience, sensing the gravity, gave a mixture of cheers and nervous clapping. It was clear they weren't just watching a celebrity interview, they were witnessing a cultural moment unfold live, one that would be dissected, replayed, and debated across countless platforms within hours of airing. As Fallon tried to regain his footing, he offered Channing the chance to directly talk about his movie without interruption, almost as a peace offering. Channing accepted, but not before making one final statement about boundaries and respect. He said that interviews should never be about catching people off guard or reducing them to punchlines, but about celebrating the work they bring to audiences. With that, he finally shifted gears, discussing the challenges and excitement of his new role. His tone softened slightly, though the tension hadn't fully disappeared. Fallon smiled nervously, grateful for the redirection but visibly shaken from the earlier clash. The audience clapped politely, sensing that the storm had passed, but whispers could still be heard throughout the studio. Even as Channing spoke about his film, everyone in the room knew the interview would be remembered not for the movie, but for the unfiltered confrontation that had rocked late-night television to its core. Fallon, still uneasy, tried to inject humor back into the conversation by cracking a small joke related to Channing's role. Normally, the joke would have landed well, but this time the response was muted. The audience, still reeling from the earlier exchange, wasn't sure whether to laugh. Channing gave a polite smile but didn't laugh, and the awkward pause that followed spoke volumes. It was a rare moment where Fallon's charm couldn't rescue the segment, and the imbalance between host and guest lingered in the air. For years, Fallon had built his career on being the fun-loving, goofy interviewer who avoided hard edges. But this clash exposed another side of the job, when the guest takes control and demands respect. Social media would later explode with divided opinions, some applauding Channing for standing up, others criticizing him for disrupting the show. Either way, the encounter was unforgettable and had already etched itself into Tonight Show history. By the time the segment neared its end, Fallon seemed eager to move things along. He thanked Channing for stopping by, his smile a little tighter than usual, and gestured toward the cheering audience. Channing stood, shook Fallon's hand, but his expression remained firm, not softened by the usual lightheartedness of such farewells. The applause filled the room, though it carried a different energy, more like appreciation for the honesty they had witnessed than the routine enthusiasm of a celebrity exit. As Fallon turned back to the camera, his voice wavered slightly, trying to keep up the upbeat tone for the show's continuation. But those watching could tell that the clash still weighed on him. Channing exited the stage with a confidence that suggested he had no regrets. What should have been just another promotional stop had turned into a headline-grabbing confrontation that blurred the lines between entertainment and raw reality on national television. The aftermath of the segment rippled through the studio like a shockwave. Crew members whispered among themselves, unsure whether they had just witnessed a career-defining moment for Channing or a rare stumble for Fallon. The audience, still buzzing, clapped politely as the cameras cut to commercial break, but many couldn't resist pulling out their phones to tweet about what they had seen. Even before the show had finished taping, social media was already exploding with speculation. Clips of the tense exchange circulated online, and the hashtag #Tatum vs Fallon began trending within minutes. Producers huddled behind the scenes, debating how much of the footage should be edited before broadcast. But the truth was clearer: this was too big to contain. By the time Channing left the building, paparazzi were already outside, waiting to capture his first reaction. Fallon, meanwhile, retreated to his dressing room, shaken by how quickly his normally effortless charm had slipped out of his control that night. For Fallon, the incident was a wake-up call. Known for his easygoing persona and refusal to dwell on controversy, he suddenly found himself at the center of one. Critics began to ask whether his comedy style, based on poking fun at celebrities in ways that sometimes strayed close to the linear, was overdue for re-evaluation. Meanwhile, Channing was being hailed as a voice for celebrities tired of being reduced to gossip and tabloid fodder. His outburst, though unexpected, struck a chord with fans who admired his willingness to speak plainly on live television. While Fallon's team worried about damage control, Channing's representatives quietly celebrated the fact that his film promotion had now gained unprecedented attention. The clash had created an instant media storm, and neither man could step back from it now. Both were locked into a narrative that the public couldn't stop dissecting, replaying, and debating at every possible angle. The following morning, major news outlets and entertainment blogs ran with the story. Headlines varied wildly. Some painted Fallon as the victim of an overzealous guest, while others framed Channing as the hero who finally stood up against invasive questioning. Video clips dominated social media feeds, generating millions of views in just hours. Analysts on talk shows debated the ethics of celebrity interviews, and radio hosts replayed the audio for listeners who couldn't believe how raw it sounded. Fallon, usually shielded by his reputation as the nice guy of late-night TV, suddenly faced criticism for his insensitivity. Channing, meanwhile, received both praise and backlash, who admired for his honesty but also accused of being too confrontational. The controversy sparked deeper conversations about boundaries, privacy, and the blurred lines between comedy and cruelty. It was no longer just about a single interview, it had become a cultural flashpoint, igniting discussions far beyond the late-night stage. Behind closed doors, Fallon's producers considered how to address the situation on the next show. Some suggested Fallon issue a light apology, something framed as good-natured acknowledgement of a misunderstanding. Others argued that ignoring it entirely would be safer, letting the frenzy burn out on its own. Fallon himself was conflicted. He knew his brand was built on being fun, harmless, and approachable, but now he risked being seen as careless or even exploitative. Channing, on the other hand, was doubling down. In a brief interview outside his hotel, he told reporters that he had no regrets and that he simply wanted respect for himself and others in his position. His calm but firm response only fueled the fire, with fans applauding his refusal to back down. The contrast between Fallon's nervous silence and Channing's unapologetic stance only made the story grow bigger, with no signs of fading anytime soon. As the days passed, late-night competitors began weighing in. Some praised Channing for his courage, while others teased Fallon gently, framing the incident as an unusual crack in his otherwise smooth hosting style. On social media, fans created endless memes, replaying the most dramatic lines from the interview with captions that exaggerated the confrontation. The Tonight Show's official accounts stayed quiet, fueling speculation about how Fallon would handle his next broadcast. Meanwhile, Channing's movie began trending worldwide, not because of its trailers, but because of the drama that had unfolded during its promotion. Ironically, what had started as a confrontation about respecting boundaries ended up amplifying attention on the very work Channing wanted to highlight. Whether people sided with him or not, they were now talking about him non-stop. The eruption on Fallon's show had become more than just a viral memento, it had turned into a defining event in both men's careers. Fallon finally broke his silence on the following episode, choosing to address the incident directly in his opening monologue. With a nervous chuckle, he admitted that the interview with Channing had gotten a little heated, and he tried to spin it as one of those unpredictable moments that makes live television exciting. The audience laughed politely, though the energy in the room suggested they were waiting for more. Fallon stopped short of issuing a full apology, instead framing the event as a misunderstanding between friends. Yet for many viewers, his words didn't go far enough. Online, critics argued that he had missed an opportunity to genuinely acknowledge why Channing reacted so strongly. Meanwhile, fans of Tatum doubled down, posting messages praising him for refusing to let the moment be dismissed so lightly. Fallon's attempt at damage control might have softened some edges, but it couldn't erase the fact that millions had seen him lose control of his show. Channing, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the storm. He appeared at a film press conference the next day, and reporters immediately brought up the clash. Smiling slightly, he admitted that it wasn't the kind of attention he had expected, but he stood by his words. He repeated that entertainers deserve respect, and interviews should highlight their work, not their personal struggles. His calm, confident response contrasted sharply with Fallon's awkward explanation the night before, and it only bolstered his image as someone unafraid to speak out. Fans cheered him on across social media, and several fellow actors quietly voiced support, suggesting privately that they too had felt cornered in interviews. What might have been a short-lived scandal was evolving into a wider discussion across Hollywood. Channing's eruption was no longer just a headline, it was becoming a rallying cry for change in the way celebrity interviews were conducted. Within the entertainment industry, debates erupted behind the scenes. Producers, publicists, and agents began rethinking how they prepared their clients for late-night appearances. Some questioned whether Fallon's brand of comedy, which relied heavily on light teasing and poking fun at personal quirks, could survive in an era where audiences were increasingly sensitive to respect and authenticity. Others argued that the confrontation was overblown, insisting that most viewers still watched these shows for laughs, not lectures. Regardless, the ripple effect was undeniable. Bookers noticed a sudden shift in celebrity requests. Some asked for stricter guidelines on interview topics before agreeing to appear. Meanwhile, Fallon's competitors quietly enjoyed the chaos, happy to see their rival under scrutiny. Yet, deep down, everyone knew this was bigger than one late-night spat. It was about evolving cultural standards, and Channing Tatum had, perhaps unintentionally, placed himself at the center of that conversation. For Fallon, the challenge was regaining trust. His team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, booking high-profile guests and scripting softer, safer segments designed to remind audiences why they loved him in the first place. He leaned heavily on musical skits and celebrity games, avoiding any questions that might be seen as invasive. Slowly, his charm began to win audiences back, though the shadow of the Channing incident lingered. Commentators noted that his interviews seemed less spontaneous, more cautious, as if he was determined not to repeat the same mistake. Channing, meanwhile, continued his press tour, and with each appearance, the incident was brought up again, reinforcing his role in shaping the debate. He never sounded defensive, only steady, which earned him admiration. The two men's careers continued, but the memory of their clash remained etched in late-night television lore, serving as a reminder of how quickly things can spiral on live TV. By the time Channing's film premiered, the narrative had fully shifted in his favor. Reviewers praised not only his performance but also his candor during the Fallon interview. Fans packed theaters, some even admitting they had been drawn in simply because they wanted to support him after watching the viral confrontation. Fallon's show, though still popular, carried the subtle weight of the night, with viewers occasionally referencing the clash whenever a guest seemed uncomfortable. What had begun as a simple promotional stop had evolved into a cultural flashpoint that redefined boundaries in entertainment. Channing's eruption proved that celebrities were no longer willing to silently endure invasive questioning for the sake of ratings. Fallon, for all his attempts to downplay it, had been forced to confront the limits of his comedic approach. And audiences, watching closely, knew they had witnessed more than television. They had witnessed a turning point. In the weeks that followed, the clip of Channing Tatum confronting Jimmy Fallon continued to circulate online, racking up millions of views across platforms. College classes dissected it in discussions about media ethics, while podcasts replayed the exchange frame by frame, analyzing body language and tone. Fallon's reputation as a light-hearted entertainer didn't vanish, but the incident carved a permanent notch into his career timeline. He became more cautious, more polished, and perhaps a little less spontaneous. Channing, however, gained a new layer of credibility. He wasn't just seen as an actor or dancer anymore. He was now recognized as someone willing to stand firm, even under the bright lights of live television. The eruption had shifted from a moment of awkwardness into something bigger, a cultural marker that symbolized the evolving relationship between celebrities, the media, and the audiences who consume their stories every night. Channing himself reflected on the experience in later interviews, admitting that he hadn't planned to erupt the way he did. But he explained that years of holding back his frustration had built up, and Fallon's questions were simply the spark that set it off. He emphasized that he bore no personal ill will toward Fallon, but he hoped the moment served as a reminder that respect should always come before comedy. This honesty only strengthened his bond with fans, who appreciated his transparency. Fallon, meanwhile, avoided revisiting the subject too often, but when pressed, he would acknowledge that the exchange taught him valuable lessons about sensitivity. Over time, the sharp edges of the incident dulled, but its impact remained. It had started as a fiery confrontation, but it grew into a rare example of television shaping broader conversations about boundaries, dignity, and the human side of fame. Industry insiders later admitted that the incident influenced how interviews were conducted across Hollywood. Publicists grew more protective of their clients, demanding tighter control over the topics discussed on air. Late-night hosts became more careful, threading the needle between humor and intrusion with greater awareness. Some criticized this shift, claiming it made interviews bland and overly sanitized. Others argued it was long overdue, insisting that comedy should never come at the expense of humanity. Channing's name continued to be mentioned whenever these debates resurfaced, his eruption becoming a reference point for how much the culture around celebrity interviews had changed. For Fallon, it was a humbling reminder that even the most beloved entertainers could misjudge a moment. For audiences, it was proof that even the glossy world of late-night TV could crack open, revealing the raw emotions that lie just beneath the surface of stardom. Years later, when retrospectives of Fallon's career were produced, the Channing Tatum interview was always included. Commentators described it as both a low point and a pivotal lesson in his journey as a host. For Channing, the event was less of a blemish and more of a badge of authenticity. Fans remembered him not for losing his temper but for standing up for his principles in a setting where many might have stayed silent. The clash, though heated in the moment, ultimately elevated him in the eyes of the public. It was replayed, quoted, and even parodied, yet through it all, the essence remained the same. A man drawing a line in the sand on national television. The Tonight Show carried on, but the memory of that night lingered like an echo, reminding both hosts and guests alike that authenticity always finds its way through the scripted layers of entertainment. In the end, The night Channing Tatum erupted on Jimmy Fallon's show became far more than just a viral clip. It symbolized a turning point in the relationship between stars and the platforms that amplify them. What started as a tense, awkward confrontation grew into a cultural discussion about respect, comedy, and the humanity of those in the spotlight. Fallon weathered the storm, adjusting his approach and learning from the fallout. Channing walked away with a strengthened reputation, his film boosted by the attention and his voice amplified in an industry often more interested in spectacle than sincerity. The story proved that live television, for all its polish and planning, still has the power to reveal unfiltered truth in unexpected moments. Audiences didn't just witness an eruption, they witnessed a reminder that even in the brightest glare of fame, authenticity still matters most.